Hey guys, and welcome to another one of our Ghost Country podcasts. As usual, I'm joined by my co-host over in Germany, who's now known as Geist, formerly
Yeah.
Manuel.
Hey guys. Hey guys. No, my new name right now on the channel is Guys. So don't be surprised. He didn't kick off Manual. It's
Uh,
just
you know,
the new name.
missed opportunity there. But we're also joined by a special guest today, Micah History 2. So, hey,
Yes. Hello, everyone. So my name is Micah. I go by the name of Mike History 2 on
other.
YouTube, and I am a history YouTuber. And I've had the great pleasure of being invited to this podcast, which is obviously the first podcast of the year. We're only 1 week in, and so that's pretty cool. Thank you guys for hosting me.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I will leave a card for your channel, and you'll also see a link down in this description if you guys want to check out his channel. But today, yeah, we're all going to be talking about one of the ghost countries we've covered on the channel previously, New Caledonia, which just at the tail end of 2021 had the third and more than likely final referendum on independence, in which the no vote won again. So, yeah, who wants to start out? Manuel, you want to start out talking about this a little?
Yeah. I mean, that referendum that you just mentioned, it had an overwhelming majority for it to stay part of France.
Mm-hmm.
But problem is, it was boycotted by the Kanak people, and and therefore is not really uh, how to call it legitimate, or at least it lacks legitimacy, I guess. Um, but yeah, we'll see how the story goes on. But that's at least what happened most recently.
Yeah, I mean, just to give the numbers there, it was something like, uh, anyway, wait a second, I'm looking at my numbers here. Um, you can go on for a second. Yeah, no, sorry. Wait,
Sorry, I
there we
just
go.
stepped.
There we go. I had a moment there. But yeah, no, it was like 96% voted no, so to remain a part of France, and you only had about 3.5% that voted yes. But like you said, somewhere in the range of 40 something percent of the pro independence side boycotted this election. So yeah, there's definitely questions about whether you can say this was, I mean, was it done legitimately? Yes, but I mean, you did not have full participation. So who knows what's going to happen? I know some of the pro independence groups have talked about bringing the matter to the United Nations. They dispute the results. And the reason, to be clear here, the reason a lot of these pro independence groups didn't participate, at least the official reason given, was well, the ongoing pandemic. And there's certain things like grieving periods in Kanak culture, plus just the difficulty of going door to door and campaigning during such a situation. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you want to say the matter is definitive, because I think it could be, I don't know, things could, you know, I just don't feel the situation is completely resolved at this point, despite this being the final of the three referendums.
Yeah, it definitely feels kind of weird if you have like a big chunk of the population refusing to take part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so we'll see how it goes. I mean, they could also just ignore it and let it sit for some decades. Who knows?
True.
Um, but I also think there is going to happen something else.
Yeah. And to be fair, I mean, we've seen a lot of unrest throughout France's overseas territories somewhat recently. I mean, there was, again, stuff related to the pandemic going on in Guadeloupe. And there's always the ongoing issue of, French Guiana, Polynesia, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway,
All
yeah,
interesting those countries.
yeah, yeah. But Micah, what are your thoughts on the referendum?
So, I mean, yeah, it is interesting because as I was doing my research, like I did see there was actually there've been a lot of independence referendums recently.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one in 2018, one in 2020, and another one, yeah, that just ended like a couple of weeks ago. And as you said, like because it was boycotted, it was 96% chose to stay. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, like I guess I don't have a fully formed opinion on it yet,
Sure.
but at least for me, it seems like they probably will stay in France, even if it isn't boycotted, because the last referendum, um, 53% chose to stay in France,
Hmm.
and in the 2018 one, 56% chose to stay in France. I mean, it is going down, um, but until it definitely gets under 50%, I don't think it's likely that they'll get independence. But there is something interesting though, because again, I'm not like I really need to do more research on it, but I've kind of looked up the demographics,
Hmm.
and obviously it seems to me that most of the people who vote to leave are the Kanak people,
Hmm.
and probably a few mixed people as well is what I would guess, but I'm sure most of the European others would likely be the ones who voted to stay. I mean, if you know more about this, then let me know, but that's just my impression of it.
Yeah, no, there definitely is something of a demographic divide, and you can see that in some of the electoral result maps and stuff like that. You know how certain districts or areas vote. I do know we mentioned, and it is kind of an interesting trend, that there's a growing amount of the population that just identify as, Caledonians or New Caledonians, and they're kind of moving beyond some of the existing, I guess you could say, labels. But I do agree that when you look at the numbers, more than likely, even if there was full participation, I don't think independence, the vote for independence would have won in 2021, even though it was definitely narrowing. But there's a whole bunch of factors that contribute to this. I mean, we even saw this in the comment section from some of our viewers and stuff, but a big reason a lot of people in New Caledonia want to remain a part of France is they receive a lot of developmental aid and resources, and not to mention protection by the French military and all these other benefits. And in some ways, you could kind of make the similar arguments with other independence referendums elsewhere in the world, like Scotland when that came up. I mean, a big issue, not the only issue, but a big issue was the benefits that Scotland was receiving from the UK itself. So I think there's a similar argument going on there. There also was concern about China's influence, and Manuel, you might have something to speak about that a little bit, but there was definitely concern that China was eyeing an independent New Caledonia as, I don't want to say a win for it, but maybe an opportunity.
I mean, I think for China, basically all ways to gather influence in the Pacific area
Hmm.
would be something good to them. I mean, uh, it's also a strategic position,
Hmm.
um, especially since we had like a lot of trouble going on with China and Australia.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that could be definitely an opportunity. I'm not gonna say they will or they would, but the chance would definitely be there.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, and I mean, looking at it from like a geostrategic positioning, New Caledonia is in a, I don't know, strategic part of the world. It's pretty close to Australia and New Zealand.
it's close to a lot of countries actually. There, it's
Yeah,
directly in the center almost.
yeah, no,
Uh,
exactly. And I mean, when you look at like, economics and stuff, it's a resource rich country, especially in terms of like nickel and other alloys and stuff. So, I mean,
didn't they
we
also
talked
have
about,
rubber?
hmm?
Didn't they also have rubber?
I don't know if they have rubber. Maybe they
Could
do,
be
but
wrong.
I know we talked about that in episode that like one of the main drives throughout, well, at least the 20th century, so with like World War II, a reason the Japanese wanted to occupy New Caledonia were the nickel resources on that island and how that could contribute to their war effort. And I mean, when you go back further in time, I mean,
Yeah, and I would like to add
I'll go.
that, for the French too, like New Caledonia really isn't like most of the other Oceanian, like, I guess, territories. I
Hmm.
don't mean like of France, but I just mean in general, because it is a lot larger. Because
Hmm.
even when you look on a map, you can actually see it, whereas most of these other places, I mean, even fairly larger ones such as Samoa and stuff, like they're still not that visible. But New Caledonia is actually a pretty large piece of land,
True.
and I do also think another big thing that is gonna make this complicated is that it's about a quarter of the people there are Europeans, which
Hmm.
is mostly French people, and so those people, yeah, I definitely don't think that they would want to live in like as a minority in a hypothetical independent New Caledonia. And so I think probably they're the ones who would want to stay part of France the most, as a lot of them were actually born in like metropolitan France itself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, like you said, it's something we mentioned in the video as well. It was interesting to see that demographic switch in the, if I'm correct, this was in the 20th century. I mean, it began obviously before that, but you definitely did have that switch to where, the indigenous Kanak became, they're the largest ethnic group, if I'm correct, but they're not, the largest group overall anymore. And that's, it in many ways, it altered the history of New Caledonia. And you see this playing out through so many other countries and conflicts around the world. I mean, like, kind of thinking back to another ghost country we covered, but the Western Sahara, or Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. The Sahrawis no longer make up the majority in the Western Sahara. Most of them have, fled to various refugee camps in like southwestern Algeria. And that completely changes the equation because when, the population changes and people are coming in, people are leaving, it's just.
I feel that became like a new thing. That whole stuff, like populations are moving, and therefore, like the legitimacy is not given anymore, or
Mm,
at least changed up. Because we have that in a lot of conflicts recently, where I mean, for example, in the Baltics, or also in the eastern Ukraine,
well, think
where
about the British
yeah,
in Ireland, specifically Northern Ireland. I mean, that was over generations, but again, kind of a similar thing.
Definitely think it's really interesting for the Sahrawis how they have become a minority because I never knew of that. Like, I guess yeah, it does make sense with all of the with so many of them being refugees, and I'm sure new Moroccans are sent there as well. Like,
Hmm.
it's definitely interesting how that changes a lot of, you know, a lot of things.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, demographics, population changes. I mean, throughout history, those have been used sometimes purposefully, plenty of other times, not intentionally, but they definitely can change the nature of a conflict. I mean, we've seen countless people pushed out of territories and other people come into it to settle it. I mean, most of human history, honestly.
yeah.
But
I
Yeah.
mean, I just want to say, I mean, I know
sure.
that these because I was saying it seems like a new thing. No, because I mean, because it happened recently a lot. That's why I
Hmm.
was. I mean, I'm totally aware that in history, of course, you had dozens of these kind of cases within just a country's history.
Oh, yeah, but to your point, I mean, the changes in this part of the world are much more recent. Again, I feel like I'm plugging all our episodes recently, but Christmas Island is another good example of that, or the Cocos Keeling Islands. I mean, you
Or the
know,
potato peppers.
but well, I was at least in like Oceania, those changes really only happened in, the 20th century, more or less. I mean, they were ongoing before that, but that's really when the shift happened. So,
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, actually, could I mention, I guess, a brief history? I don't know if you guys
sure.
have mentioned the history of like the entire island or more of just the independence part, but since it is like, I guess, what I'm more interested in, if you
Hmm.
don't mind.
Oh no, go for it. That's we cover from beginning, like discovery to present day in the episode. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like from what I've gathered, the history of yeah, New Caledonia, I mean, basically obviously like, the people have been there for like a really long time.
Hmm.
Um Back before records even really began. But I mean, interestingly but not really surprisingly, the first European there was James Cook.
Yep.
And because actually for a very long time, like I'd always wondered why is it called New Caledonia? Because I know Caledonia was a Roman name for Scotland, and so I was always wondering why a French name, a French island, I should say, had a Latin slash Scottish name,
Hmm.
and yeah, it turns out that's the reason why because um James Cook went there and it reminded him of Scotland and at least the northeastern part. That's why he called it New Caledonia. And obviously, like, there were some other contacts between that time, but really, like, I guess the modern history began in 1853
Hmm.
when Napoleon III ordered Admiral Février de Pont to take possession of the island. And so he founded Port-de-France, which is modern day Noumea. And that is kind of basically the beginning of the French conquest of the island. And kind of like Australia, it was used as a penal colony
Yeah.
where a lot of political prisoners were sent, especially during the Paris Commune, although most of those ones went back. But in 1864, nickel was discovered, and you guys were talking about that before. And so basically, that is what really permanently consolidated the French rule there. Because after they found that, like, they weren't going to go back. And so that's when they started importing laborers from other areas. And actually, a lot of these people are still there. But obviously, the Kanak people were, treated badly and they were excluded, and so they weren't just going to give up. They fought, they fought against them, but once again it was the old world diseases which really um yeah, caused a lot of problems. Then, as you said, the Japanese invaded, um although the French took it back. And then 1946 it became an overseas territory, and in 1953 all New Caledonians were given French citizenship. um And then you get to the 1970s and there's a big nickel boom, and that is what caused the European and Polynesian populations to increase a lot. Although it's important to note that the New Caledonians are Melanesian,
Hmm.
and so the Polynesians aren't really native there either. And and then it's sort of after this that the Kanak independence movement began, and that's there's sort of a lot of fighting between 1970s up
Oh yeah.
until the Matinho agreements in 1988 and the Noumea Accord in 1998. And then after that, there's the referendums, and I'm sure you guys have covered that in a lot more detail. But that's basically, I guess, the summed up history of New Caledonia.
Oh yeah, and I mean, we go into quite a lot of detail about that in the episode. But what I thought was interesting that you mentioned, and it gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit more about it, was well, so like you said, when Captain Cook discovered, air quotes here, the island, you had already had a long history of the Lapita culture, which, interestingly enough, may have originated in what is nowadays Taiwan, and those moved throughout the region. But after Cook, there was really only sporadic contact, and you have a lot of stories of like whaling ships getting shipwrecked there, and reports of cannibalism or headhunting. All of this can't be verified, but long story short, the island was pretty much isolated until you had that sandalwood boom in the 1840s. But what I wanted to pick up with what you were talking about there was the movement of people, even back in the 1800s. And a big, big factor in this that we went into some detail in the episode was the phenomenon known as blackbirding, which
Yeah.
more or less was, well, either through deception or kidnapping, taking people to work as either indentured laborers or slaves. And in many ways, the two are the same thing, because you were in a situation you were not going to get out of, no matter, even if you received pay, you were basically stuck in the situation. And this happened throughout the entire region. It wasn't just unique to New Caledonia, but this really did change a lot of things. You had indigenous Kanak leaving for other islands nearby. You had people coming in from other islands. There was just a massive amount of movement of people in the region until the practice came to a definitive end. And then you had other economic factors, like you mentioned, the nickel boom and others that continued to facilitate the movement of people. Not to mention the penal colony system, which was its whole other thing. Because like you said, with the Paris Commune, you had political prisoners coming in, and quite often, I think they were called the communards, but quite often a lot of the prisoners, even after they finished serving their term, were required to basically become colonists on the island. They had to like stay. Not all of them. The political ones, I think, got a lot of exception clauses to this. But long story short, it was a multifaceted history that greatly altered the demographics of the island over decades, centuries.
It is interesting that you talk about blackbirding because that's something I first heard about when I was doing my research for a lot of the history of Oceanian countries that I did.
Oh,
So I
okay.
did a lot of different ones. I think I did like history of Tonga, history of um or maybe not Tonga though. Um I did history of like Micronesia. I did history of yeah, Marshall Islands, those kind of places. And it's interesting because so all those islands, blackbirding happened.
Hmm.
And for some weird reason, all those videos became really popular. Like most of my popular videos about are about the history of Oceanian countries. But
Hmm.
nevertheless, like it is interesting that this blackbirding phenomenon was something went was going on a lot during the 19th century all over, yeah, the I guess the continent for lack of a better word.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think one particularly egregious incident we mentioned in episode, and the dates are escaping me now. I should have gotten this ahead. Was the Easter Island mass kidnapping? It was a collective effort by I think it was Chilean and Peruvian recruiters, as they were called. I might be getting my information wrong here, though. But uh, do you remember the number manual? It was like an insane amount of the population was kidnapped
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I don't remember the number, unfortunately, neither. But I remember that incident. I also find it funny that they call it as recruiters.
Yeah,
But
yeah. And I remember doing research on this one. The information is very hard to come by. There's not a lot of documentation about it, but it really was just a mass kidnapping of the island's population. A tremendous amount of people were just taken away, never to return.
Wait, could you tell me what year this was?
That I don't remember.
in 1862.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah, here I just found it. They said in December 1862, Peruvian slave raiders struck Easter Island. Violent abductions continued for several months, eventually capturing or killing around 1,500 men and women, about about half of the island's population.
Yeah, I looked it up in our video. It was
Wow.
1862 to 1863. There's a little bit of
Did you say it
discrepancy.
was Peruvian
Per-
people who did this?
Peruvian and Chilean, if I'm correct,
Hmm.
so-called recruiters.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's insane. That's half of the island's population.
yeah,
Yeah, I
no,
mean, that really is crazy. Like
yeah, that was
that's a massive
35%.
demographic change in such a
Oh,
short amount of time.
yeah, no, it's absolutely crazy. And when you look into things like this, it's I don't know, like one thing begets another. Like completely off topic here, but a subject I've wanted to cover on the channel for a while was the Canary Islands and the indigenous people who were there, because often, and I don't want to go on this with like historic or like 100% definitiveness, but like that's referred to as the first, I guess you could say it's definitely not the first, but one of the first recorded genocides where it was the indigenous people on that island were slowly wiped out over time. But there's a lot of discrepancies, so it's something we'd have to explore further in an episode. But yeah, when you have these small isolated populations on islands, something dramatic like this can happen.
Yeah. I mean, these whole kidnapping cases, that actually reminds me so much of Northern Africa during the early modern period,
Ah,
because there was also a lot of kidnapping going around at that time. It was mostly like from the coasts of what nowadays is like Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, where they were
so-called
basically,
Barbary states.
yeah, exactly, where they were just capturing um, mostly Europeans and selling them.
Hmm.
So it's like, yeah, it reminded me a lot of this because that was yeah, a pretty big problem actually at the time.
Yeah.
Um, but also almost forgotten nowadays.
Yeah. Oh no, there's tons of
Yeah.
history like this that are forgotten, or basically forgotten nowadays. Like an and I'm forgetting this, and this is really going to bother me, but remember when we were discussing some ideas for our upcoming mini-series Ghost Events, which is everything from battles to just forgotten episodes in history. I don't remember the name of it now, but remember there was that one island near New Zealand where the indigenous population was wiped out. You probably don't remember, and the detail I'm giving here is not good enough to help, so yeah. That's...
To be honest, I just remember one island near New Zealand.
Okay, well,
it's Tasmania, but yeah.
It's near us. Yeah, I mean that's kind of near, but yeah, whatever.
Isn't that very near to New Zealand?
I mean, it's Australian, but it's kind of near.
Yeah, I always thought that was next to New Zealand.
But either way, yeah, no, it's New Caledonia has had a very interesting history. There's been a lot of ups and downs and turmoil and change within the archipelago. I guess as we're getting toward the end of our podcast, I guess I was going to ask you guys, what do you think the future holds? Because I know, French President Macron has tried to frame this as definitive. Like the vote has been had, the referendums have been, the agreement has been honored, the referendums, have all been had. And, now New Caledonia and France together are going to embark on a new chapter. And I know there is another referendum about exactly what that collective project is going to be. But do you think this really is an end to the push for independence? Or I don't know. What do you guys think? Whoever wants to go first.
Okay. I guess, the first thing, obviously, we can never know for sure what's going to happen in the future. I don't think that's a really controversial statement. But, I think that at least in terms of referendums for independence, I definitely think that there won't be any for a while because, again, we had one in 2018, 2020, and 2021. So I really don't think that, with 3 referenda in 3 years actually, or 4 years, I should say. I definitely don't think that there's probably much of a will to have another one, especially because people want to stay probably are yeah, we chose 3 times to stay, and then the people who want to leave think that it's not a fair referendum anyways, and also definitely not in France's interest to hold another one.
Sure.
So I really doubt there'll be any, at least for a decade. After that, I'm not sure. It is interesting looking at the trend where more and more people want independence. And so it very well could happen in the future. However, I definitely don't think it's going to happen in the near future. But of course, there's always unforeseen events that we can't predict. I would also say, at least for the whole appeal to the UN, it sounds like, something that could happen, and it might even actually happen, but with France being on the Security Council and being very influential there, I doubt it will make, much of a difference whether they appeal to the UN. At least that's what my thoughts are, but, anything could happen that we can't predict.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. It depends a lot and also on what's going on the island, because even though the Kanaks are not the majority, but they're 41%, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Of the people. So, if 41% of the people are, I don't want to say rebellious, but not happy about where things are going, that can be definitely something bothering for the island itself.
Well, and that's the big question, in my opinion. It's do you think we're going to see a return? And I know this is all just speculation, but to the unrest we saw, in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s. In our episode, remember, we covered kind of the, I guess you could say, crest of all that rising tension and violence was the Uvia hostage taking, which was a pretty big deal. That happened on the eve of presidential elections in France, and a number of people were killed, and it's definitely it has a lasting legacy for both sides.
I mean, the thing is, before the referendum, before the boycott of the referendum,
Mhm.
I would have said, no, they won't go back to this period. Now, I feel like they feel pushed to a corner,
Mhm.
and it might happen that there is also again some uprising or whatever. But on the other hand, I feel like if there is another uprising, that's almost like an opportunity for those people who want to stay part of France to just say they're terrorists and
Mhm.
you know uh, do what they do with terrorists, and that could be definitely then the end of that movement. So it's definitely difficult to predict what's going to happen, but I don't see an uprising impossible
Mhm.
right now.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting. I would agree as well. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. Things have been kind of quiet since the referendum, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens. And actually, one other little random note I wanted to throw in here. I don't know if either of you guys have heard about this, but there is another referendum on independence coming up in the region in 2022 sometime, unspecified.
For New Caledonia?
No, not for New Caledonia. This is for what is Chuuk, which is a island in the Federated States of Micronesia. Now, this referendum has been said it was going to happen multiple times, and it's been delayed multiple times. And there is a lot of similar things going on with this referendum in that, like, Chuuk is, at least I think that's how you pronounce it, it's Chuuk, is really close to Guam, so it's considered strategically important. And I know the United States, along with probably Australia and even Japan, among others, are worried that an independent Chuuk would fall under Chinese influence. And China has devoted a certain amount of, from what I can see, at least tens of millions into development in the area. So, there's
Similar to the Solomon Islands.
yeah, I mean, and there's also been talks about, like, would there be a Chinese military presence invited to an independent Chuuk? There's been denials of that, but the long story short is that's right on the border, so to speak, of Guam, and
Yeah.
got one of the deepest lagoons in the Pacific, so ideal for theoretically naval facilities, whether those are commercial or military or some combination. So there's a lot of interest, I guess you can say, from various parties on this. Although the referendum has been delayed multiple times, and at least to my knowledge right now, it's just unspecified when it will take place. I think the original date for it was March 2015, but it's been delayed somewhat, like 3 times now. So who knows if it'll even happen. But
the independence movement will be from which country?
it's in the Federated States of Micronesia, so Micronesia.
Oh, okay.
And it is the Chuuk state, which is one of the 4 states that comprise Micronesia today, the others being...
If you don't mind, can you tell me why Chuuk wants independence?
Chuuk, that's a little harder to say. I mean, to my knowledge, it comes down to power sharing among the islands in the Micronesian government. There's also the factor that Chuuk, to my knowledge, is pretty underdeveloped, like really high rates of unemployment. They feel they've been, economically disadvantaged. But I don't want to make generalizations. But the whole thing is, Micronesia is a loose federation, and there's been people who floated ideas around like this at various points in times. So I think it really comes down to just, wanting to be in charge of more of their own economic and political affairs, at least for those who are advocating for independence. But, there also comes down stuff to, like, strengthening, or I should say safeguarding Chuukese identity and culture. There's some who claim independence would bring increased economic opportunity through control of a very large and strategic exclusive economic zone, new taxation system. So, taxes would go to Chuuk, not to the rest of Micronesia. And yeah, I mean, there's, it's kind of like what you hear for a lot of independence claims. And I'm not saying that in any dismissive way, but it's just like it's kind of the standard fare.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I just thought that was interesting to take note of, because that may or may not go down this year. And that's just kind of a little bit of an interesting other referendum that might be in the works. We'll see.
Are there any predictions or something?
I don't know, because it's been delayed so many times. And there's no specific date as far as I can tell for this year, so who knows?
Okay, so we'll keep you posted on the channel.
Yeah. But, I mean, referendums can be very controversial. There's plenty we could look into that, past and future, that cause trepidation.
For a referendum, for a referendum, you also always have the question how legitimate is that referendum, because there might be several ways how a referendum can be influenced.
Yeah.
With legal or even not legal ways.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So, yeah, it's always difficult to say when a referendum is basically a real referendum or when it was finished.
Yeah. Well, I guess on that that note, we'll wrap up this podcast. But thank you again, Micah, for joining us. Like I said, I'm going to, leave a plug for your channel in this video, and you can also see a link down in the description. Be sure to check out his videos, and hopefully you'll be able to join us again, and we'll be joining you for something in the not too distant future.
Yeah, and
thanks so much for inviting me.
If you have any video we have which you find particularly interesting, then you can just write us if you want to join our podcast or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on. I mean, for this or whatever in the near future. It'd be cool.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. And with that, I guess, bye, guys. We'll see you again next time.
Bye.